Welcome to the NEWSPASTE Podcast, everybody. My name is Johnny Vedmore. You're here again to talk with someone. We're going to talk with Jason today, Jasun Horsley, who's the writer. You can find him on childrenofjob.substack.com. Landmade Man. I like that title, landmademan.com. He's a really interesting writer with a load of books that all just look like they would interest me completely. I didn't realize the ones that you had done before, but I knew the Kubrickon was out. But Prisoner of Infinity, The Vice of Kings, Seen and Not Seen, and now Big Mother, the technological body of evil, which is described in very basic terms as a bold examination of artificial intelligence, consciousness, technology, and the human urge to return to the womb. That is a brilliant just way to start, because most of the people who listen to the NEWSPASTE podcast, Jason, and enjoy this work that I do, are baffled, scared, and terrified, petrified of what artificial intelligence means, what it means for the consciousness, what we see the people entering into a cyber realm willingly. And it's very scary for everybody who doesn't feel that comfortable about the cyber realm. So Jasun Horsley, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to having a conversation and picking your mind about a subject which, of course, like I say, not only I, but loads of people find very prescient. Now, it's right on our doorstep, artificial intelligence.
Yeah,
How
well,
are
who
you
knows?
today?
Yeah, good. How are you doing, Johnny? Thanks for finally getting me onto NEWSPASTE. Yeah, this thing of artificial intelligence, that you just introduced with, is it on the doorstep or is it already coming through the back door? This is a really important question, I think, to start with. I don't know. I don't know if anybody on the ground knows. Certainly those, those above Elon Musk, let's say, for simplicity's sake, presumably know and have some idea. Well, I'm not just to make it clear to you and the listeners, I'm not any kind of expert. I don't know anything about computers except how to use them. So I'm coming at this as a layman, which in a certain sense I approach all my subjects. I'm not an expert in anything. I don't personally trust the experts anyway. But I'm also, it's not that I'm lazy, it's that throughout my life, I've just followed the things that interested me and gone as deeply into them as I could until I felt that I'd found what I was looking for, and then I moved on. So each of my books is kind of a new departure. So I don't have a single discipline unless it's what I poetically termed mapping hell, which is trying to understand how we got in this bad situation that you and I, and probably most of your listeners would agree that we've ended up in, how we got there, and is there a way out? How and why we got here. So Big Mother is to some degree the culmination of that, brings together a number of different strands in my books, including the one before it, which was Kubrickon, which is kind of more, that gets more into a hypothesis about what AI might be. Big Mother is more about, explores consciousness and what consciousness is, and then the relationship between technology and on the one hand, discarnate entities, also known as demons or jinn. That's rather speculative. And on the other hand, a sort of Freudian lens of psychology, of like what I call maternal psychic bondage, mother bondage, that whole area, which I think, I'd say I have direct experience of that.
No, God, yeah, we all do. But
Right.
mums are often complicated, especially when you're like for a girl, fathers are complicated. It's the opposing role model, isn't it?
Sure,
And
sure.
and 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 it is the further question of looking, being in Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, and seeing the face of your father, and then it's your own face. Well, when you're looking into the face of your mother, that's something that is intangible. And it's hard to understand what a woman is.
Well, that's a interesting. I mean, I can bounce right off that image that you created, because it's one thing I talk about in the beginning of the book, A Big Mother, is how a child's psyche is formed, a sense of a psyche being a sense of self-awareness through the mother's face, through gazing into the mother's face. I mean, this has been observed, and by those of us, just lay people, but also it's been clinically observed that when the mother, does peekaboo, for example, and the first baby's smile is mirroring the mother's smile, and so on. So, as infants, we are unformed, physically and psychologically. We don't have a sense of an identity or of existing, except purely at a somatic or sense-based level. Mentally, we've got no sense of existing. So that develops over the first few years. And one of the key moments in that is through this silent communication. Well, it might not be silent, but non-verbal communication between the baby and the mother that very much does involve gazing. And so I do start from that, partly like who we are as human beings, and this is particularly pertinent to men. It really does begin in the mother's body, and then in relationship to the mother's body once we come out. Of course, there are cases where the mother's absent and so on, but we just keep it simple. And so the extent to that, do we develop an identity around our identification with the mother's body, or our relationship to it and our desire for it? But it can lead to identification, which is why I bring transgender into the book. That's a very, it's a complex thing we don't understand, and it's a potentially perilous thing, because you don't want to be dependent on your mother your whole life. And it's something that can be exploited, let's say, just to round up in a simple way. That natural process, first of all, it can come about in ways that are not ideal. Like my mother was alcoholic and she was depressive and so on. And second of all, it can be exploited, by the culture and by groups and agendas that I'm sure everybody here has some sense of, who want to get in very early on, right? To get into the human psyche at the earliest possible stage, to co-opt it. And so, I connect that to social control systems, but also metaphysical ones in Big Mother, and then artificial intelligence is the culmination.
The thing I find interesting, one of the things I find interesting about all of that is the connection we have with that. Those basic, when you're talking about the mother's face, I was thinking about my own baby's face when he was younger, and how he was reacting. When you talk about the womb mother, trying to understand our journey, these are all things we connect with, of course, on a personal level. And then the understanding of where we're going is a disconnected photocopy of that, or a poorly managed photocopy of that. I'm also interested in that journey you're talking about of your own research as well, which later on maybe we can get into, because it's very much like you seem to like to concentrate on each project at a time to kind of understand that strand and then move on to the next strand. You seem to be very much that person. It's very interesting that you talk about the womb there, and your last book was about the most recent book was about Kubrick, and the end of course 2001: A Space Odyssey, where you're kind of in that womb, and we all feel like this eeriness of being both akin to the monkeys at the start and this godchild in the womb at the end.
Right.
And that kind of never leaves us. But this is you seem to research within looking towards the future from the very human, base human psychology, and it's very. I tend to go into the past and look at us. I'm looking in the mirror all the time and looking at the face of my father or my mother all the time in my research, and you seem to be propelled forward. And I think we need a lot more of that, because we're entering into a stage now where people aren't quite understanding how serious this is. I mean, even most of the people who are listening here will think they have a grasp of where this is taking us. Now, uh, is the disconnection of consciousness? How long will something like that take before we see proper change? Is it already almost there?
Yeah.
Are most of the people who are around like disconnected from their own consciousness? And do you then disconnect from what we would call a soul? Then I know those are very tough questions to go into very
Yeah,
quickly.
they are, and there's two at once as well. So
Even, sorry.
what you're describing as disconnection from consciousness is what I refer to in Big Mother, and it was going to be the subtitle or even the title, as disembodiment. So that's the uncoupling of consciousness from the body. And yeah, I think that that does have to do, or that can end up with being disconnected from the soul for reasons that maybe we can go into, but very briefly, because to me, the only way that we can really ever experience existing as a soul, as in beyond the body, is if the soul can become fully embodied. If that consciousness that we think of as the soul, that is eternal, potentially, if it can have a fully embodied experience, then it has a sense of existing separately from, you know, the great oversoul, if you will. So yeah, first things first, like trying to get to the soul or save the soul, and these kind of questions, which obviously have to do with consciousness and consciousness that transcends the body. The first order of business, as I see it, is to get to the body. Like, we haven't made it to our bodies yet. And I mean, there are theories that, and I don't know how, how much these could be confirmed, but that when a child is born, this does relate to what I was talking about just a moment ago. It's Yeah, it forms in the womb, and then it comes out of the womb. But the consciousness, the theory is anyway that the consciousness of that baby isn't all the way in the body for the first couple of years. That it's more kind of around the body, and so in sort of New Age metaphysical terms, you might say it's kind of floating over like astrally over, but I don't know what the specifics are, but I think there's probably some validity in that idea that consciousness isn't localized to the body in the early stages for a child, for an infant, and that part of the development of self-awareness corresponds with that consciousness coming more and more into the body. I mean, you look at babies and they kind of look at their fingers and their toes, and it's almost as though they don't even realize, or very much as though they don't realize that's them. Over time, we do learn to become identified with the body, but that's potentially a trap, because consciousness isn't restricted to the body, at least my sense of it. But it also, just because we identify with the body doesn't mean that consciousness has landed fully in the body. So anyway, that was a bit long-winded, but disembodiment is how I understand the long-term program of what I've called organized malevolence. Like, whatever that is going on this planet that mythologically is described as the snake in the Garden of Eden, and there are other myths that have other kind of Ahrimanic or satanic figures in there. And the archons is a popular one, I think, in conspiracy circles now. But whatever, this somehow malevolent, organized influence. What's its agenda? Like, you're saying that I try and project to the future. Well, part of that is that I'm just trying to find a unified thread that makes sense of everything sufficiently that I can apply it, right, to life. And so part of that, so it's not either or. I'm looking back to the distant past, but I'm also looking, where are we going, and what's the common thread here? What's the driving thing? And so anyway, so I did end up with disembodiment as one label for understanding this. And it seems to me that's become much more obvious in the last 20, 30 years that we are becoming more disembodied, less embodied. But I say that it's more of a symptom. Like because we were already disembodied, we've been easily manipulated to develop ideologies, habits, and technologies that will further our disembodiment. So it's written large now with the technology. You know, people really are more and more putting their consciousness into machines and living in machines to the point that something like the metaverse, even though it didn't work the first time out around, is appealing to people. Like people are they're buying it. They're thinking, yeah, that would be cool, which is in itself is a symptom of something.
Is it like the input of more information helps with the disembodiment, or is it an agenda that is manipulated? You know, how much is you know, it sounds like I'm not sure. I feel that back in the day, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, people on average would probably have been more in touch with their own consciousness and would have probably been able to live in their own consciousness with their own consciousness more. And that nowadays, the more input we have and the more we know and the more information we put in, the
Yeah.
more chance that detachment happens, that disembodiment, as you
Yeah.
call it.
Well, it depends what you're knowing, of course, because people over thousands of years, peasants, let's say, like for thousands of years, most of humanity, most human beings were peasants of one form or another. There's always been a ruling class to some degree, and who have wealth and luxury, I suppose. Even in primitive societies, there were hierarchies. But yeah. So anyway, the life of a peasant or a farmer is by definition more embodied. They do know lots of things, but they don't have this kind of mind-based information thing. Never mind the internet and Google and so on. It's experiential knowledge that they need to know about the weather and the cycles of growth and animal husbandry and built, masonry and carpentry and all of these things. They're all to do with survival, if you extend survival to comfort and just quality of life. Um, and they're all, as I say, experience-based, but they're all to do with very precise and unchanging laws of matter. So I talk
Mm.
about this, observing the law of
Mm.
matter. So they don't really allow for dissociation. Like the more embedded you are in the natural world, the more you have to just observe the laws of physical reality and learn how to get around them in the ways that you can. But you can't really ever get around them. But you can, if you obey them, you can dominate them. There's sort of this symbiotic relationship with matter.
So we in a sense, the people of the past would craft more, and we with technology are being crafted and are taken
Something's
away
happened,
from
yeah.
us.
That's very much in the Big Mother thesis. Like, at what point did the technology, the tools we create, did they start to turn the tables on us so that we became the tools of the tools that we created? So I even take it back to fire. Like, to what extent did our dependence on fire reduce? Well, first of all, kind of it might have led to projecting onto that fire something that qualities it didn't really have, like thinking that it was a god or that worshipping fire, let's say, in some way. And that's an obvious way of disempowerment. But second of all, just more profanely, to what extent did human beings become dependent on fire, therefore less resourceful in terms of keeping warm or surviving on food without fire? So even fire, you could make an argument that we weakened our spirit by discovering fire. You could. Right. So, but if you say flash forward thousands of years, it's like 2001, Space Odyssey, then you end up with smartphones, where I think it's clear, it's indisputable that 99% of what, I don't have one by the way, but what you're getting from your smartphone through it it's not useless. That would be saying it too far, but it's not essential. It's inessential, and
Hmm.
um, it's not helping you to become more connected to physical reality. You know, I had to specify that because it is useful for connecting to other human beings, for example. So obviously it has its uses. We're using it now that are positive, but if they're vastly outnumbered by the not positive ones, which, as we all know, like the internet was created by DARPA, not everybody knows that, but it's a tool of the controlling, the ruling classes, um, then we're constantly being, sold to and tricked and deceived and snared and all the rest of it. So then, and part of that is, or the main part, or one part is that we're just ingesting all kinds of useless information or inessential stuff that's causing us to disconnect. But the other thing I just wanted to end on was that it's the medium itself that we're spending more and more time actually interacting with machines, putting our attention, our energy, our life force into the machine. And that's, you see, with fire or other things, that seems fairly healthy. Like if you just spend your whole night staring at the fire, the rest of the tribe might think you're a bit weird and you might get a bit lazy. But still, you're in this symbiotic relationship with something that was created directly by life. But these technologies, they're sort of some intermediary liminal space. Um, and so yeah, so this is, I said I was going to end on that, but actually I'll just add another thing, which is this is part of my thesis of what AI is. It's machines that are created by human beings who are themselves semi-possessed by the tools and the technology, as a means to keep siphoning off our consciousness, keep uncoupling our consciousness from our physicality. And then where does that consciousness go? It goes into the machine. Like,
I suppose the fire didn't benefit massively from our interaction, but the machines benefit enormously from our interaction, from keeping our gaze, and so eventually, once AI comes in, all the computers are going to be trained to keep your gaze, and that's what we're seeing is that's where the difference. I mean, you chose to give your gaze to fire, but this is more of an addiction. Now, I sometimes I stare at things people watch in horror at times, not because I'm any better or I watch better stuff. It's because probably because my work, like your work, is going to be very research intensive. And so you spend a lot of time reading and taking in things that you need to take in to advance yourself and your knowledge. And the majority of the internet is not people advancing your knowledge. When you were saying there that, it is very much a waste of time, and all you're doing is inputting to the machines, so they get more data and more data, and the machines in the future will be able to disseminate the data of the past. So as long as they keep bringing data, that means that they're going to keep improving, especially I mean, what we're seeing at the moment is there's really bizarre stuff happening. We are right on the precipice of that change right now.
mm,
People don't realize how much is upon us. I was I started the year off with a bit of a bang. I got into some big, what are called, I don't know if you knew, that Twitter got taken over by X, and then I got this thing called Spaces, and it's run by this lovely guy called Elon Musk, who only has the best interest for you. At least that's what X tells me.
yeah.
Uh, and I started off the year by being invited into a space to talk. And these spaces are like public forums, they seem very beneficial. Everybody's, you got a panel of maybe 32 people sitting there, speaking politely mostly. And then in these rooms, I mean, we had millions of people over the period, listening, and it feels very nice. It feels like humans getting together. Um, but right at the start, there was an account. I think you'll enjoy this story, and this will be is useful. There was an account called Adrian Dittman, And the person who said you should go and ask if you can get into that space, and it was a central Epstein file space, and I'm an Epstein expert, so I ended up being like fairly central to the whole thing. They used me to go and talk with other people and to control conversations, which
Mm.
seemed very interesting. They knew how to use me. But this one account, Adrian Dittman, we were both sure, me and the person, that it was Elon Musk at first. That it was Elon Musk's sock account. It sounded like Elon Musk. The speech patterns were kind of like Elon Musk, but with a tint of a slightly more British accent, just slightly more, like it's almost a little bit fake. But there was something that didn't feel right.
Mm.
Didn't feel human about it. And as times developed, I started watching this account more. Now, the other day, Jason Bamas, a very good researcher, came out and said, "Wow, look at this Adrian Dittman account. What is it? Because it sounds like it's Elon Musk." But when you actually investigate further, me and someone else behind the scenes were chatting about this for a while, and we started to think that maybe these spaces were actually a scraping, like a data scraping exercise for AI,
Mm.
and that some of the people who are interacting in there are no longer human.
Right.
They're really high level, run by Grok or one of the AI systems like that,
Mm.
really high level. And it's indistinguishable from a human, apart from it seems like the conversation's always a conduit to another person or another action. It was always to get things moving. It never becomes too much essential. It gets very awkward. But how close are we? Are we already there? Are we already at the point where there's no return? Because I know you live far out away from the world, from most of this technological sort of revolution that's happening.
Sort of.
Um, yeah, well, yeah, and no one gets away with it fully. I'm right in the center, you know. I look around and people aren't there anymore. They seem disembodied. They seem detached from
Yeah.
themselves. Um, what's the progression in your view? I know that's a quick, like a big question to go on to,
Well,
but
yeah, I mean,
what?
because there's two things. I mean, one is it because you're talking about online interaction in an environment of online, which of course has been created um, somewhat with this in mind, I suppose. But anyway, it's a testing ground for AI, let's say. You know, even in the early days of the internet, I think I had this idea, okay, well, this is how they would create AI, is they create a landing pad and then they get as much consciousness as possible to focus on it. And then that consciousness is a kind of um, well, I've got the right analogy. It's like a wind tunnel or something through which this AI consciousness can land. Anyway, that was quite poetic, fanciful, but the Kubrickon is pretty much that thesis, and it has to do with capturing people's attention, and it has to be a particular kind of attention, and then yeah, and then harvesting it, and then recycling it. Let's say so it has to be a symbiosis, like AI as I see it, has to be a symbiosis between machine intelligence in quotes, which is an oxymoron in my view. There's no such thing as machine intelligence. There's machine, maybe something like cognition. Like if machines can play chess, there's something where, and that's in 2001 as well, where they can make decisions, but they're not decisions based on sentience. They're decisions based on kind of reaction, deduction reaction. I'm just improvising now, so I could probably get caught out very quickly by an expert, but just trying to give a sense of what I mean anyway. There is a difference. Like actually, if you look in nature, you can see that the animals like chickens or even cats, they are quite mechanical. You know, they have personality in that, but essentially you'll notice they'll do the same physical movements over and over again, and the exact same physical movements that any other chicken or any other cat. So there is a kind of mechanical element to nature, which includes so sentient beings they are partly mechanical, let's
Well,
say.
output attracts input, I suppose. So, you know, the expression of human life attracts something towards it.
Right. Well, so. So, and what's the difference between this kind of machine-like way of being that we see in animals and human beings? Potentially, I'd say it's this idea that we have of the soul. And the soul has to do with real deep sentience, self-awareness, sentience plus self-awareness, let's say. And that's what it could say that's what the machine covets, but that doesn't really make sense because the machine doesn't really want anything. But something, including some human beings, want to somehow capture this special soul sentience that human beings have and trap it in the machine somehow. So anyway, I was saying, so there's two angles. One is the life on the internet, in which case it's relatively easy for a bot to pass the Turing test because we don't have the usual, as human beings, we don't have the usual gauges by which to tell if it's human or not. Like if it's just text, you've got nothing. Like there must have been text, bots passing for human beings for decades, probably, actually. And then it's extended to telephone switchboards now. I think many times you're on a switchboard and you don't realize it's a machine. As far as I know, that's true. So this is to do with we're not getting enough information as human beings to tell. So of course, if you can make it a lot easier for a bot to pass the Turing test if you reduce the number of the amount of stimuli by which we tell. Right. So if you remove face-to-face interaction from most interactions, then it's a lot easier for machine intelligence to pass the Turing test. There probably aren't actually synthetic robots walking around just yet. I can't rule it out. Could be, but let's say that hasn't come to pass. But on the internet, certainly with voice, but even now with deep fake and CGI, we don't know how advanced that is, right? To create, like I could be talking to a Johnny Vedmore bot now. I have to acknowledge that it's possible. The technology,
Beep beep.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, the technology might be available. And I trust that there are ways that I would be able to tell, but that might be naive, presumptuous on my part. So anyway, so that's the first area. As I say, kind of, yeah, all bets are off at this point. We're kind of we're off the reservation or we're off the map. We really don't know. We just have to trust in our own discernment and keep developing it and keep questioning, is this a human being? Is this a human being? Second thing is actually in real life, away from keyboard, these people, I mean, those of us who are more and more immersed in the technology. I'm just doing my hand swiping imitation now, but what's going on with them? Like they're becoming less and less sentient and aware of what's going on in their environment. And they're being more and more, as we saw with, can I say the word COVID? I don't know, or mRNA, but anyway, as in what's
I
happening.
think you can now. If Nigel Farage is allowed to say it, then everyone's allowed to say
Okay,
it.
because I know you use YouTube still. I know Google has stopped saying that it's not evil, so we know it's definitely. Anyway, as we've seen, yeah, people are becoming more and more possessed by propaganda, by information, false disinformation, which is why Davos said the number one enemy this year is disinformation, because that's their number one tool, right? So symmetrical. So yeah, people who are more and more dependent on technology to get their sense of what's going on in the world, and they're by the same token, really, because of the platforms that they're directed towards by the technology, such as Facebook or New York Times or whatever it is, they're becoming more and more easily and more fully possessed by the propaganda. So I would say those humans, by definition, becoming less and less sentient. So then the question mark that Big Mother looks at is, well, what enters in where human sentience or soul consciousness is no longer able to go? Something else enters in there. So then we have this thing of non-player characters, NPCs, which has become a trope on the internet, of necessity, I'd say. Like, are the human beings around walking around among us who are NPCs? They're walk-ins, right? They're not. They don't have sentient. They're being run by AI in quotes, but we have to say what is AI, right? We haven't got to that yet.
What
Exactly.
you're saying, the physical um, born of nature humans are kind of switched off to a degree that they're all of their they're being propelled by AI, they're being propelled by their computers, they're being propelled by their technology, so they become equivalent to one of the bad Grand Theft Auto NPCs that would walk into a wall and just do. I mean, that's really essentially it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's certainly part of it. And that's the part that I was beginning with. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Program behavior, and we're all that to some degree. Like you can't be have been born in the last 100 years, I'd say, or at least since World War II, without having right, being installed with a program very early on.
Yeah, no, I don't think in history, throughout history, even tribal history, you get a different type of programming from your community, and you accept a certain amount of that. Um, but then you can choose not to play the game, but then you get zeros and ones. You see, I kind of, I can understand why it's so easy for machines to be able to will be able to process this information. They're all about zeros and ones, and that is very much, I think, how I see interactions happening nowadays. I see it very becoming more machine-like as it goes on. I do a lot of walking around with a camera in city centers and talking with people, and I find that I talk with so many people in hotels over the years. I've kind of understood that people react with either a zero or one. It's easy to make it but you're
Yeah,
either positive and negative. And if you get a negative and a positive, it usually ends with a negative. So you don't, I'm walking down the street being positive. Every time I meet a zero, I'm like being a one. I'm not saying that's amazing, but I'm just being purposely being positive, purposely being polite, purposely being social.
yeah,
And I meet a zero, then we just that's all of the possibility within that interaction just disappears straight away. But if I meet another one, then suddenly this expression of life, everybody's smiling, talking, and suddenly it's like human is there again. So I start to feel that a lot of these people who are turning off to technology right now and turning to technology are mainly living their life with an output of zero all of the time, and that's the submission. That's the same submission that may be noted in things like the Milgram experiment, etc. Where you just humans submit to the all-knowing as the all-knowing creature. It doesn't have to be a human. That if they think it's all-knowing enough and it's above them, then they will submit to it.
yeah.
Uh, it doesn't isn't that going to be the majority of people who submit?
I would say somehow, by definition, it is the majority. I'm not sure if I can explain that why it is, but I guess because we're talking about passivity, and there's something about being non-passive and being autonomous that equates with an ability and a willingness to separate from the herd. So somehow by definition, those who go along are always going to be in the majority because what they're going along with is the majority, the tide. So that does seem to be just baked into the experiment, quote unquote. Maybe this relates back to the difference between human and animals, because animals, it's okay for them to be herd. I mean, not all animals are herd animals, actually, but even wolves go in packs. Cats are very independent. But anyway, it's okay for some animals to be herd animals because they are herd animals. Human beings, well, I don't think they're animals at all, actually, but they have an animal side, of course, and certainly we weren't created, if I can use that phrase, to be herd animals. So there's something about the creation of the herd human being, again,
That
as we've seen with
primes
COVID.
people for disembodiment. It like
Or
primes
that, yeah,
people
it's
for that.
it's inseparable from this disembodiment. That is inherently satanic. It's an inversion. Like a human being somehow is supposed to be. It's not an island. It's the opposite of an island, actually, because a human being is supposed to be connecting everything to everything, I think. And so we are connected to each other, but somehow. I'm sure there's an analogy here. It is about a bit like North and South and binary, actually, that North and South pole, in order to function as poles, they have to be separate. So there's something about human beings to really function as a connection to other human beings. We have to have some separation. If you actually just cram us together, there's no possibility of connection, which is what
Hmm.
we're seeing. People are more and more cramming together and more herding, but they're also more and more isolated in their own bubbles, which is a weird
Hmm.
paradox.
Uh,
But what reconciles it is that their bubbles are being informed by a monocultural, monolithic message. Right? It's coming through all the nodes, like the pod people in the Matrix.
I would assume that a lot of people are turned off by human. Oh, they have a choice between human interaction and indulging in whatever they seem to burst into their mind when they're using their devices,
Yeah,
and that human interactions potentially like doing a brain workout, like actually going for a run. The people, and I'm not one of those people, who get out and go, oh, I'm going to go for a run for a few hours now, and sort out my body. But a lot of people, I mean, I suppose when you're talking with people, you're doing that with your mind. When you're interacting with people in the real world, you a lot more sparks are happening in the brain than if you're interacting through messaging,
sure, because
and
it's more confrontational, it's more in your face. It's what you also, well, what I was saying about matter, farmers, they have to interact with matter directly and constantly push against it, find out the limits. Also, what you were saying about the difference between you and I and many people who use the media is where we have this creative interaction with it, where we're constantly finding ways we can use the information. Um, and use it as raw material to make new discoveries. That's similar also. Like there's a constant testing of the limits of knowledge and awareness. Is it true? Is it false? That, yeah, human interaction, uh, ideally, I mean, if in its natural form, if people aren't just, constantly checking their smartphones or any other forms of avoidance, it has this same quality. You can't just fall back on a script. You have to actually, is this person listening? Are they responding? Am I getting through? Right? And so you're finding out things about yourself by bouncing off the other person, right? Not just in discussion, but just everything. Right?
Mhm.
It's a transference of awareness. So that's our potential and that's our natural optimal state. And I think this relates to what you're saying about the zeros and ones, because I thought that was actually an interesting point because what I'm something I'm looking into now, narratives, that we are part of the propaganda, and the symptom of being propagandized is that we always want good and evil stories. We want to know who's good and who's evil so we can identify with the good and despise the evil. And that's so crippling, actually. It's so pervasive if you look at World War II history, that's like, I was just reading, that's the formative myth of our culture, actually. The origin myth of our current culture goes back to World War II. And you have the ultimate evil, and therefore you have the ultimate good. But if you just look into World War II, it's simply not the case. Don't worry, I won't take us there. But,
You can if you want. I'm
right.
into that sort of stuff.
Okay, but yeah, his point being that it's just false anyway. I mean, well, I will make the point that people who look into World War II history, they often fall into the trap of flipping it. They go, "Oh my God, what I thought was ultimate evil wasn't, and what I thought was ultimate good wasn't. So it must be the other way around, right?" And so they actually do
The
become,
classic fallacy. Yeah, yeah. I
yeah,
mean, it's like the repulsion of the thing that as you've noticed you're in a cage, you're repulsed by the cage, so you get into another cage, and then you're like, oh, I got out of that cage.
yeah,
Oh, it's a horrible cage. I feel this, and I feel the amount of knowledge I've like gathered, and really only in the past 4 or 5 years. I always thought I knew about the war. Then I went through that journey that you're talking about, where I went over to watch all of the things that I wasn't supposed to watch, and went, oh God, it's nothing's like, and all the things I'm not supposed to listen to, nothing's like it's meant to be. Turns out all of these people were really nasty, but that doesn't make Hitler and the boys and the gang nice. It doesn't, and I I went and watched something just yesterday, a movie that's known as one of the most anti-Semitic movies of all time. It had come up in an article in one of the Black Hand series, where I'm investigating a woman called Esmeralda Gulen, and her brother was a Campbell Gulen, was a famous actor in the 30s, and a producer, movie maker, and he made a movie called Judensus, and or Juices, and it
Oh, yeah.
was about a Jewish guy called Seuss who's um it was the first one, the original one with Campbell Gallan starring in. That movie was known as a philo-Semitic movie, so it was like pro Jewish because they were, there was so much negativity happening that there was an automatic propaganda response from the West, of course, to try and make this philo-Semitic movie. And then Goebbels funded the recreation of it in 1940 of Juices, and it's known as one of the most anti-Semitic movies of all time. And I thought, I never actually watched it. I've been told so much about how much it is, how terrible it is,
Mm.
and I should go watch it to see if it's true. And I watched it properly yesterday, and I was just amazed. It was a really quality movie. It had some really edgy bits in it, like really raunchy bits. For it was really, like, in general, well made. I would never call it the most anti-Semitic movie of all time, but it is very anti-Semitic, of course, because it's underlying. It's at that time they'd all sides are creating myths that will control the people, and they're doing it in ways that have just been taught to them, or just they've just discovered from people like Lenin. So you've got, like, Leninist propaganda was so it came out in different cultures in loads of different ways. In some in Russia and Soviet culture, it was, look, brother, we have this propaganda, spread it to people. And they basically didn't hide that it was lies. Everybody who got the next one would be like, spread this propaganda, brother. And, it would just be spread the information and make people think this way, because that's what we've got to do to create change. So everybody was aware that they were being manipulated. Where when that came up in fascist ideology or the West, it started to become a subversive. We're going to introduce propaganda quietly. Shh, don't tell anybody. We'll do it through intelligence, and we'll put it out in the movies, and we'll make people think a different way.
Yeah.
And I think that was the side that won World War II, because
Yeah.
it was the most effective, and
Yeah.
yet not the best. So
Yeah.
I
No,
think.
I would agree. And to bring it back to a general point, yeah, the problem with propaganda that's under the radar that way, that just slips in, and we can't distinguish it from real information, isn't simply that it's false in itself, but because it over time it uncouples us from reality. So like the more, and this is why I was making the point about World War II, because there's practically no one alive now who was born before World War II who was around to remember it. And so that means to me, because it seems as though that was the biggest disinformation campaign ever, actually, in the history of the world, really, was World War II, and the way it was rewritten afterwards. And so that means that we were all born into a sea of lies. We were born into a narrative that was essentially a distortion, false, illegitimate. And because it was such a foundational narrative, right? As in, that's how we gauge good and evil. We look, Nazis bad, Churchill good. My God, it's and then, well, we mentioned the Jews, I mean, we just have, but innocent victim, therefore good, and so on.
Mhm.
But reference points that are mythical, let's say, just to keep it kind of neutral, they're mythical. Sure, maybe the Nazis were pretty bad, maybe most of the Jews were quite innocent, and maybe the Allies did do some good, whatever, there's elements of truth in there, but it doesn't really matter, because the main narrative is a mythical narrative that is a profound distortion of reality, and that it gets incepted in us. Like you and I, we were born into the culture where our parents unquestionably accepted that narrative, even though they were around to see some of that, and then passed it on to us. So I don't know what the analogy would be, but I think it is kind of close to what we've been talking about with AI. You create a like this landing pad or this main frame, and out of that main frame you generate a consciousness. That's the AI hypothesis. But that's also what I'm saying about human consciousness, that mainframes get created by the, like Orwell says, those who control the present control the past, those who control the past control the future. Those forces, they create the mainframe for human consciousness, and it is always binary. It's always binary, and you'll always be wrong. It's not like ones are better than zeros. They're both. If you're a one, you're just as stuck, as you said, with these cages, as if you're a zero. You have to be both a one and a zero, which means neither a one nor a zero, which is I don't know what, right? We're off the map again.
Two, two. I still, it's very much, it's very much comes down to like the game theory as well, and the things that led us to algorithmic idea of algorithms, AI, computing, all of this. They all. I wonder if it's a race to our own destruction or something we can't avoid. But yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to necessarily come off what you're saying there about the creation of myths, because we're just creating a new myth for ourselves. I mean, that post-World War creation of mythos creation wasn't just about the war either. It was about things like the frontiermen going out and taking America by force off the Indians. Westerns were the most popular thing to watch because it gave people a foundational narrative to say, you're not bad people, you're not related to bad people. But the truth was also, you're not bad people. If you knew, you're number one, you're not your ancestors. But number two, your ancestors thought they were doing the right thing at that time because that's what the narrative was telling them. So they weren't necessarily wrong, but they weren't necessarily right. They were somewhere else. And one thing that I came across in my research was this idea of how America saw themselves post World War II, which was like this big soulless behemoth. And that makes me think of AI. It's almost like the American actions post World War II have been almost indistinguishable from what it's like the route to automation taking over completely, and intelligence taking over. So
Yeah.
have we already in our societies parceled up the parts of AI, what AI will do, and we're already been doing them for the past 75 years?
I had a thought there. I'm not sure if I'll have to improvise to get it out, but it has to do with like a fear of evil and of darkness, a fear of doing the wrong thing, like our ancestors, right? Of getting it wrong. Somehow that creates the idea of being mechanized. That makes that idea more and more appealing. Somehow, like if we can just get it down to a science, like what's the right thing and the wrong thing, and we'll just program ourselves so we'll never ever do, never again. We'll never do this terrible thing. But basically, you have to cut yourself off from your primal nature because violence, brutal sexuality, rage, disease and death, they're all just part of nature. We can't actually create some environment in which we're protected from external evils or internal evils. The only way to do it is let's mechanize the fuck out of everything. I mean, this was H.G. Wells's vision, I think, and Bertrand Russell's Scientific Society. I remember reading H.G. Wells when I was quite young, and him saying, I think it was a novel even, but oh yeah, we'll create a society where we'll get rid of this, that, and he included wolves in there. And it struck me,
Wow.
even young, I'm like, my God, you want to get rid of wolves?
Wow.
I don't understand if it's ticks and mosquitoes, but no, he's going. And okay, fair enough. If you're going to be practical, this is the point, really. If you're going to be pragmatic, you've got to get rid of everything that just threatens
Yes, yes.
comfort and convenience. But then that extends to the inner realm as well. You've got to cut off the soul because the soul is the most unpredictable thing. You've got to traumatize
Because
and
the soul will
use
connect with
children.
the wolf.
Yeah, the soul is connected to nature, needs to connect to nature and the primal, um, and have that raw, unfiltered experience and expression. Children. I was going to make a point about children as well. Why children are so targeted in this society, because of course they are just naturally connected to the primal and nature. They don't have the filter of conscience
Hmm.
slash morality. So, traumatize them, circumcise them, turn them into machines. Uh, anyway, and then the last thing that occurred to me in all this is kind of ironic that this is in 2001 as well, that except it's the reverse in a way, because it's both actually, because the problem with Hal, and this is my thesis for Kubrickon, which is that Kubrickon, when he was working on 2001, he realized that this was a real problem. How do we create AI in such a way that it won't deduce rationally that human beings need to be removed for the same reason that H.G. Wells wanted to get rid of wolves, because they threaten the natural stability of the system, right? So he saw
Hmm.
that as my thesis. He saw this as a problem that was more interesting than making movies. So after that, he dedicated his life secretly to how do you create an AI
Mm.
that won't destroy humanity? So there's the two things in there, like, because of course AI does, I mean, Hal does go mad and kill the humans, right?
Hmm.
Um, Precisely, I suppose, because he was created in such a way as to, as I'm saying, to protect human beings. This is in Asimov's actually three laws of robotics, isn't it? Um, why create AI if it isn't to protect us or serve us, protect and subvert? But if you do that effectively, it will end up destroying us because it will see that we're our worst enemy.
And also that it will learn that it can create as well, because it's we've given it all of the tools to be able to create, and then suddenly, what creations come from something that's so detached from humanity. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
God,
What's
there
it
was a
see?
there was a few things going on there that I was thinking, because you're talking about I don't know if Bertrand Russell was. I would suppose he was. I know H.G. Wells was, but but these guys were Fabians. These guys were about like
Yeah,
a slow,
yeah.
slow, careful introduction, and it also, I mean, whenever we have stories that lead round to Kubrick, I really, it became very clear to me in my research on Herman Kahn of the Hudson Institute,
Mm.
that he and Kubrick, I mean, Herman Kahn denied that he was the real Doctor Strangelove, as it was, but I mean, it was pretty clear that he was one of the many facets from different famous characters in the like nuclear, mutually assured destruction, perpetual warfare sort of scene of the late 50s and early 60s. He was one of many characters that was used to create Doctor Strangelove. But Khan himself said, "Oh no, Kubrick told me himself that I'm not the actual, and if I was, my wife would be angry with him." And he seemed to have a very both Herman Khan and Kubrick started, I think, to concentrate on that during the late 60s and 70s a lot more. It kind of like I think there was the people who know, who can map out, who can model, realize where this is going, and it can only lead, surely it can only lead, if you're not switched off and like disembodied, detached mentally, and just in the technology, then you can't help but to see that this is obviously going to have a negative effect on humans, because we become the lesser life, the lesser, there you go, life.
Yeah,
Because we're talking about now. Okay, this is a really good like place. You for There's three stages of AI. So there's artificial narrow intelligence, where we are now, artificial general intelligence, and
mm,
artificial supreme intelligence, or something along those lines.
mm,
And of course, these are supposed. I mean, it's theorized, because it could just be artificial narrow intelligence all of the way down, and it's just very complicated versions of that look indistinguishable from magic. Do you think that we're round the corner from something which is like HAL? Do you think that's like exponential? So once AI teaches itself, is self-learning, then
Yeah.
it can't help but to get there at great speed.
Um, I suppose it's in there, but well, there's two things that come to mind right away. One is that if I'm half right about Kubrick or at all right, I mean, um, Hal was the model of how not to go, and Kubrick, working with Khan and Minsky and whoever else behind the scenes at DARPA, was focusing on a very different thing. Like 2001 showed, this is not the kind of AI we want, right? Because we don't want it to destroy humanity indiscriminately, right? Uh, so that's one thing. I've forgotten what the other thing was now, but um, uh, I mean, I think AI is like it's like the alien invasion, same, acronym. Um, it has to come through the back door. So there's certainly maybe, of course, you can't avoid the people in Silicon Valley and elsewhere who grew up on Star Trek in 2001, who are trying to create AI just in this rather conventional fashion, albeit with the internet being an obvious, algorithms and all that, actually using human consciousness, that's acknowledged to some degree. All of that's going on, um, and it's not necessarily uh, separate from this other agenda, which I have to posit in Big Mother isn't primarily human; it's only secondarily human, which is that. There's already an intelligence which isn't artificial, but it's inorganic. There's already an intelligence that wants in and it wants access to the human body. So then this isn't about that machines will take over and destroy human beings exactly. It kind of is, but it's not the way we think it is and the way the movies have shown it. It's that this intelligence is taking over and it's co-opting the human body. It's turning the human body into a vessel for itself by making it part machine. I mean, or one of the side effects of that and the means to that is to make the human body mechanistic, figuratively, but also literally with nanotechnology and whatever other ways in which actual technology is going inside the human body. And or, I mean, who knows with synthetic food additives, obviously the fake vaccine, what may or may not be in chemtrails and 5G and so on. We know that the human body is under attack, consciously, intentionally or not. But
Statistically, definitely it shows. I mean, health statistics show it. The rates in autism, etc., and lots of other factors and increases in all ill health. I started to you know have to look at the fundamentals of everything I thought I believed because we got under constant attack of our own of what we've been taught. Because what we've been taught, where did we get taught from? We got taught by people who are creating these same machines to subjugate us. So they come from a place of subjugation, and the machines will come out of a place of subjugation because the only people who can afford to create supreme artificial intelligence will be funded by Raytheon and all of these other big military contractors. So I mean, that's I it's the impulse when you're having a conversation like this with someone who understands it is to ask the question like, oh, how far away are we? How far, I've tried to explain to people I think that in the next 5 years we'll watch rooms full of what we think are people talking, but they'll just be bots talking to each other, and
yeah,
even the bots won't know that they're bots. So it won't know each other are bots. And they don't know anyway. I mean the whole idea of knowledge, and you're trying to work out how a computer thinks, and then we end up in this very uh like we have a very monolithic belief. We have very mono. We have this idea that once sentience happens within a computer, that you have HAL and everything is then HAL because it's a computer. But that's not quite the way it is. Do you see? I think the better question would: do you see different forms of intelligence arising from artificial? this what is being created now? Let's
Well,
say intelligence.
I mean, as I said at the beginning, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. Like I got my own understanding and then the theories that come from that understanding, but they're not really predictive. Um, and I don't actually see, I mean, to me, the only prediction that's reliable, it's kind of what Orwell said, or a variation on it, perhaps a more benign variation, is if you understand the present, you will know what the future is going to look like. If you understand the past, you'll be able to understand the present, and if you understand the present, you'll have a sense of what the future holds. Like the thing that William Gibson said, the future's already here, it's just not fully distributed yet. That's a really succinct way of putting it. These
Mm-hmm.
things aren't as linear as we think they are. It's not like there's a discovery or an invention and boom, something. Or it's not like the aliens show up on the White House lawn and boom, they're here. I don't really believe in aliens, by the way, but I think it's a useful metaphor.
Yeah, yeah, same here.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, uh, so
yeah.
the distribution speeds up
Yeah, it's a
because of
distribution. So then it's more, and that has to do with awareness, like Whitley Strieber, who I thoroughly deconstruct with Prisoner of Infinity, but nonetheless, there's significant information in there, even if it's misrepresented to create this alien abduction narrative. He has this theory realization that the visitors, as he called them, will only arrive through the corridor of our own minds, and that they have to generate belief in them in order to be able to materialize here. Now, to me, that's too new agey, and it's kind of it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because it actually makes it more credible and you do start to believe, right? So he's playing a weird game there, but it's true of technology. People who believe that technology is possible, they could go on to invent it. So that's a much more profane example. Um, and the point is, yeah, that the technology that one day manifests or metastasizes as the computer was around, back the days of the abacus, right? It's already there. It's just, it's not, it takes time for it to really, its tendrils to really extend into every level of society. Now, as in the case of the alien takeover, the point that we realize that the aliens are among us, it'll be too late because at that point, clearly they're confident enough to let us notice. They're so prevalent, you can't help but spot them, right? So I'd say we're already too late in this regard. If you haven't noticed that we as a species and our consciousness has been being taken over, if you haven't noticed it, yeah, I mean, post COVID, for God's sake, it's too late, right? Why look into the future, really? Because the future is here. It's the future, like our future is right now. Like by the time I finish this sentence, we are in our future. It's not, you know. So instead, just look at what's going on now. That's a more important question. How much have we been able and willing to notice, right? What's going on with AI, to keep it specific on that point, goats are bleating there. How much should we notice that in the present? Because that's the critical question, not
No,
how soon or when it's going to happen.
it's very interesting at the time we're having this conversation. The goat was bleating in the background, yet I could not hear it because Zoom has taken it out. It's taken out the natural sound from a distance.
Yeah,
It's filtered it. It's learned how
not
to
that loud,
take some, but still, I
you're
didn't
out.
even hear the little bit of it because I mean, if I cough on here or something, it'll cut it out. If I play instruments on here, it'll cut it out.
Yeah,
It's very much the computers are saying, "Oh, to be focused, we need to be more computer-like, and we need to have that." Well, we say that we create this. So
right.
when you say,
Right.
"Do you know?" So it seems like a very negative, like proposal that we are already in the future, so it's too late in a sense, because, and I think it is, because you look around and you see that I explained to people that, young global leaders scheme and stuff. People are going, oh my God, they created all these leaders, and it's been going on since the 50s. And you can map all of the progression. It's just a distribution of it got more and more. At first it was just 50 people at Harvard, then it was 200 people, then now it's thousands going through the system, and that all of these sort of things happen all the way around the place. So we're very late to the party. What's the change? How can we possibly? I mean, that's obviously what cries out. How can we possibly stop people from indulging in what we cannot replace in input? We can't create the same enticement in the real world, it seems, to get that these people get in their smartphones, that they're just constantly stuck in their phones all of the time. How
Mm.
do we counteract that? Is it too late? Is this the point where humanity is about to lose itself? And is that why, just to go on, is that why we've never seen aliens?
Oh, that's about that last thought. I mean, how to tie that in there. But as far as the bulk of what you said, I don't have children, so I don't. I've got a niece, but my niece is very savvy. She's her uncle's niece, and so although I didn't raise her, I was around enough, and obviously other factors. Just she's innately born with the right qualities, I would say. So she is what I call paranoid aware. She's nobody's fool. So I'm not too concerned about her. Um, in a way, this might come out wrong if I keep it simple, but in a way, I could say I'm not really concerned about anyone, i.e., I'm not really concerned about the human race, and not because I don't think it's going down the tubes. I think it probably is, these cybernetic tubes, but because I think that the idea of a human race is part of this myth that's been created, in part of the mainframe of the myth that's been created to capture our consciousness. I'm not saying there isn't such a thing as a human race. I'm just saying that we have a word for it, like God, that we don't actually know what that means. Like, what does that mean, the human race? Right? We've got statistics and numbers and races and cities and maps and things. But unless you've met all these people, how can you say, right, exactly what, right? So I leave that one open in terms of, are all 8 billion statistical names on I presume they're on books somewhere. I presume somebody's checked that number's backed up by names, and let's say in social security numbers. But how do we know that they're actually real human beings? We don't. Even if they're real physical humans, how do we know that they're sentient? We don't, and so on. So I just leave that open. I only concern myself with those I am engaging and interacting with. Obviously, that includes you and I. We work on the internet, so we connect. You used the word millions when you're talking about Twitter, but I meant to question you. Are you exaggerating that? I don't know, but I've got like 1,000 followers on Substack.
No, no, most of my stuff doesn't get out to most people, but the Epstein file spaces had 16 million views over 2 weeks.
All right.
Of all the different spaces over those 2 weeks that I was in, it
Yeah.
was about 16 million.
Okay, so yeah, that's very big numbers. Don't know, I won't comment because I don't have any experience.
Majority of people won't hear a thing though, because they'll be too busy flicking to the next thing. So
And
I mean,
and probably are not people again, because again, bots and whatever, bots, especially
100%,
spider bots.
100%.
Um, anyway, you got bumped by the system, so somebody wanted you to get bumped. I don't know, but I've generally been I've never really built my audience in 30 years of doing this, since the early days of the internet. I'm constantly changing hats, not deliberately, but with hindsight, somehow it was strategic, because some part of me doesn't want to have a large audience. and this does relate to what I was saying, is that you can't connect to a large audience. You can provide it, media, and you can get likes from them, but if they all emailed you, you wouldn't be able to read those emails, much less interact with them on online space. I've done group stuff on Zoom, and I never got more than 20 people, and I gave it up because I couldn't even get 5 people in the end. I think the deeper I go, the harder it is to find people who are willing to come along. And to me, that's the way it has to be, actually, because we're getting closer and closer, as we've been discussing today, to the crunch, whereby it gets harder and harder to face up to the reality of what's going on if you haven't already done, right? If you haven't done the homework up to now, you can't catch up. You just can't. We're in post-clown world where there are things that people accept without questioning that are actually manifestly insane. Uh,
Yes, they
and
are.
manifestly evil, right? So, I mean, we could use examples. To me, transgender is a good example of things that absolutely do not make sense that people are claiming, and it's all framed in a humanitarian compassion bundle, and it's completely pernicious and destructive and evil. So that's one big example to me. Another is what we touched on with World War II. Which I won't mention any of the keywords because it really can get you taken down. But if you question the narrative around World War II
I know what you're
specifically,
talking about.
you
We
go to
all know
jail.
here what you're talking about.
You go to jail in 19
Yeah,
countries
yeah, yeah, yeah,
just for
yeah, yeah.
saying, right?
Virtue bubbles. They
But
create virtue bubbles to protect themselves automatically, so they don't have to do any work on it. And
well,
that's the
yes,
same
but
with
the point
transgender.
I want to
Sorry.
make here is that that those laws have been in place for 20 years or something, and how many people are talking about them? They're not talking about them because they're afraid to. Like, it's never mind questioning the narrative, even questioning the fact that people are being thrown in jail for questioning the narrative. People are afraid to do
Mm,
that. So that's
mm.
really bad. We've got to a really bad place where people are actually still talking about freedom of speech as if it has existed since World War II. It hasn't,
Yes,
right? It
yes.
hasn't.
Okay, I'm very much on your wavelength here because all my research says we're so far behind. I've said this over and over again. We're so we have not got to the party. The party's been going on for ages, and we think we know what's going on. We have no idea.
Yeah,
Every time that I go back further in history, I realize that most of the things that I've been taught are a lie on base levels, principally lie. When I say about those virtue bubbles, we naturally create we naturally turn to fallacy in our brain to make logical sense of things when we can't. We just sometimes we just accept we're not going to find logic and we just say, okay, well, I can rationalize it this way. And so our brain naturally creates a fallacy, and that virtue shield that comes up, I'm now complete as soon as someone starts to say, show themselves as a victim of something.
yeah.
I'm suspicious because I've done all of the research into the past. Now, if people want to hear someone who will openly question things like what happened during World War II, they'll end up with going to people who would be I've had a guy called Corey Hughes on the podcast who writes some very good stuff. He wrote a very good book about the assassination of JFK. But all of these people, and like me, we very rarely get a space like where we get onto a space where hundreds of thousands or if not millions are going to be watching. Most of the time, the algorithms keep us in a nice little portion, a nice little box. How do we get out of that box? How you're right when you say you try and encourage people to come in and have a conversation, and in actual fact, most people don't really, they can't rationalize what's happening at base levels. So I do think we are running out of control. Um, and I don't know where humanity is going because I think we've lost direction, and the only way out of it seems to be something that there will those fictional sort of dramas that got created to make these virtue bubbles so you can't question a certain event. They're going to be ever present in the future. They're going to
Yeah.
be our reality
That's
becomes,
right.
and
Well, that's
that's
my point. I mean, well, that's part of my point is that okay, it's just one particular subject today. Well, with COVID now, obviously it's the similar was happening right in the present with the mRNA thing. So we are seeing it unfolding. But yeah, the laws that were created around World War II and a certain event, they're clearly precedents. I mean, they've clearly set a precedent where they're legislating history. They have been legislating history since World War II. And of course, that means they can legislate in the present what you're allowed to believe in. Yeah? If you
Mhm.
believe in a certain thing, that's a criminal offense. Basically, it's
It's
what it's
unbelievable.
saying.
Yeah.
Or even if you, no, I'll make it an even finer point. If you disbelieve in something, that's a criminal offense, right? So that basically anyone is fair game. There's absolutely anything you can get thrown in jail. That's revealing the the power structure and how it functions and how it operates. But we didn't see it. Like most conspiracy researchers who are supposedly on the cutting edge have not been talking about this because if they have, they get called holo deniers. That's it. That's all they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or white supremacists that you
It's
just
very
get
clever, though, isn't
labeled.
it? It's
Boom.
very. I mean, it's simple, but it's all effective, all encompassing. It's the same strand as just being called a same tool as just being called something like conspiracy theorist. The majority of people
Yeah.
will just switch off to
Yeah,
what you say
that's
afterwards.
the thin end. Like you and I definitely like I had a Wikipedia page for a while. I did get taken down actually, but I think by my family, but I'm not sure. But that did at a certain point that called me a conspiracy theorist, and I'm like, fuck off, right? Because I knew that that's the way it's meant on Wikipedia is don't trust this guy, right? But actually, sure, I am a conspiracy theorist. I try
It's
to
kudos. It's kudos from the establishment. They hate you. They are really angry. The because really, I see because they're having to lie so much. They're indistinguishable from artificial intelligence.
mm,
They don't seem like to have that humanity, have the moral effort and ethics that we know are going to be missing from robots, and that's something that's been lifted up and praised and rewarded in our society for so long. But yeah, I think there's a lot of kudos to be had there.
worry about a lot. But it does create this conundrum which is a very general thing here, but it does sort of relate to the whole subject of AI, really, and the collective, and your question, how to reach people. That, yeah, if you're able to reach a lot of people through the media, then even if you're not being platformed, you're not being cancelled, you're not being censored. So to me, it's simple maths. You're not really threatening anything. Right. So
Mhm.
the idea of being a researcher slash conspiracy, whatever, who thinks they're actually going to be threatening the power structures is a ridiculous idea
Mhm.
because, as I say, if you are, nobody, you're going to find out and you're going to probably be sorry, not necessarily sorry you did it, but sorry that, you found out, if you know what I mean. You get
Mhm.
cancelled, you get thrown in jail, what have you. You certainly don't end up like Alex Jones or David Icke. It's just ridiculous. Sorry, it's just ridiculous.
Yes, yes,
These
yeah.
guys
I
really believe that somehow they're against the system, or Russell Brand, to use a more
Oh yes,
for
yes, yes.
example. Right, so I reconcile that tension, which basically says if I get too successful, then I'm failing. It's a double bind. By reminding myself this isn't about waking anyone up. It isn't about reaching the masses. It's about finding the others, those who actually are willing to look at the truth, no matter how much it ruins their comfortable lives potentially.
Yes, yes.
Th
Because
those are the ones.
I can't have a comfortable life. I just can't have my life reporting on facts for the past, say, especially for the past 4 years has been so uncomfortable all the time, made uncomfortable. I can't find regular work. I can't find a place that'll publish my articles.
Uh,
I know that I'm doing the right
well,
thing,
then
so I'm
that's
going to
it.
keep doing that.
In that case, they say an artist should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. I spend most of my time disturbing the comfortable, but in your case, I'd say get more comfortable, Johnny. You can have some comfort. I mean, you need
Yeah, I
a
know,
couple
but
of
I'm trying.
hours.
The fact is that even if you don't take a side and you try and be objective about everything, no
Yeah,
one wants you because they're
that's
all on
right.
a side.
That's
They were
right.
all they've all chosen their sides, and the one thing I hear from various platforms that I could work with is, oh yes, but we're trying to attract this person over here, and you're likely to say stuff about them. And that becomes the want to be in the gaze, and for them to want to increase the amount of people who watch them, they will turn to these big characters like Alex Jones and etc. And I talked with in these Epstein files
Yeah.
rooms. 2 days in a row, they had Alex Jones on there, and I talked to Alex Jones quite a bit in there. And what was really interesting is that every single person who was in the room was completely and utterly terrified about talking to him, didn't
Right.
know how to manage him, and they started messaging me behind the scenes saying, "Can you interrupt him, please?" Because I was the only one who they had in the room who had the balls to interrupt Alex Jones and lead him onto a path where he's not talking about grinding up babies and elite snorting babies, which then completely and utterly like switches people off to anything else he's said. He says a load of really good. I managed to get him talking about Justice Department and the evolution of the intelligence and stuff. And when he actually talks about those things, he's
Yeah.
actually sounds more like a historian. He sounds like a normal person, which then makes you realize, oh yeah, the rest of the thing, if you can make him talk about things that are real and
Yeah.
you hear that he's actually got a sensible, logical mind, he cannot believe half the things he says in reality.
Right.
So, I mean, a lot of these people are just there because, and are just given the platforms to be disturbers, to disturb the order of things, so that people like us, are bundled with them, are put in the same rooms with them, are attached to them.
Well, not
Um,
just other researchers, but also millions of people that follow Alex Jones or David Icke, um, because those characters basically stick to a good and evil narrative is the thing. So it doesn't matter to the social engineers practicing schismogenesis. It doesn't matter which side you're on, as long as you're on one of the sides, they can hurt you.
that's a really important. I mean, this whole world we're living in right now is like something that is out of a Kubrick novel, and it's because it is really we are we are entering into a new world. Do you think a question on this? What do you think to Elon Musk then? I mean, everybody always asks this question. What do you think he's just playing a role for the establishment
I
to
I think it's
push
a good
forward this?
question, like as an example, because Trump obviously is a bigger example of the same thing. Yeah, I think the middle way is to say that, and because this is true of Hitler in World War II, like who put Hitler in power, right? The banks and the British and American allies, and yeah, he was a useful tool for something, and that whole process did include putting him in power and then knocking him out of power. Like he served his purpose, and then
Mm,
right, and of course then he became the boogeyman of the 20th century. So you could see with hindsight something like the landscape and the methodology of geopolitical social engineering that had a use for something like Hitler. So, not to compare Trump to Hitler, or by any means, or Elon Musk for that matter, but just in terms of it is possible that somebody can be raised up and then get a bit too big for their boots,
mm.
even Alex Jones. But that just plays into the plan too, because obviously it makes them more convincing as far as
Mhm.
they really are genuinely flies in the ointment or spanners in the works. So it's very hard for
Yes,
many
yes.
people, even who don't admire Trump or they wouldn't vote for him and they don't think he's a savior or Elon Musk. It's very hard for a lot of those people to just think that he's not doing something to piss some people off because the theatre's very persuasive. And I'm saying it might not be entirely theatre. It may be, yeah, okay, Musk, these are the, or Hitler or Trump, these are the things we'll give you, and this is what we want in return. And once they get a bit of power, they start welshing. Sorry. They
It's
start
Welch. Welch.
they don't follow through, and so then they have to be cut down to size. But that doesn't change the fact that they're only there because they can be controlled and handled. And if they ever really get out of line, then well, I was going to say then we'll know it, but actually even that's unclear because Alex Jones, it would seem as though, well, that was very legitimizing because he got deplatformed and all the rest of it. But when you're as big as Alex Jones, what you need more than platform is credibility. So Alex
Mhm.
Jones can create a platform wherever he goes, as long as they can't ban him from the internet, which they can't yet. He can still get millions of people, and now he's got more credibility than he had before. So I would say that's probably, whether he knows it or not, that's probably, yeah, we do need Alex Jones, but the landscape's changing. So and also they've got to send a consistent message. I mean, it works both ways. They basically are trying to shut down a lot of people out there who are questioning things, the ones that they can't use as honeypots. So they have to have a consistent message, but then it has this complementary function of giving more credibility to the ones that they feel are useful, I would say, you know. I mean, it's interesting that you actually spoke to Alex Jones because I'm sure if I could speak to him, I'd have an entirely different perspective. I don't have anything against Alex Jones. I just think that whether he knows it or not, or David Icke, uh, the kind of dissemination of information he employs, is useful overall to the social engineering, the schismogenesis. It can be used because there's very little nuance in it. It doesn't
Mhm.
actually challenge people so that they will do their own introspection, their own exploration, come to their own conclusions. They'll just go, baby snorting evil elite. I've got to get on that bandwagon because I definitely don't want to end up, on the wrong side of alternate history, right?
I was surprised. What I discovered is that he kept using the term astute with my what I could what I was saying to him, but that was partially because I was when you get into a platform and a stage like that and you get to talk with someone who's had that much experience with these, you've got to be careful anyway because you can't if I was to go in for an attack on him, well, that's a man who understands attacks, and why would I
Mm.
want to attack him? Because he's just another cog in the machine of things. But I wanted to test his knowledge in other areas, and what I was really, was really telling to me was how he responded intellectually. He seemed like it makes the other stuff look like what it is, the creation of a character.
Performance, yeah,
Once you get them off that track and
yeah,
distract them with real world, and they start talking about the real world in real terms.
yeah.
I also found it interesting. I mean, I ended up talking with Rudy Giuliani as well.
Uh-huh.
I know, and but I had just finished an like a documentary series, which is based on an article where the second a few articles in the Pottinger series, and the second article actually Giuliani is the one who lets this guy Pottinger off the investigation, like doesn't investigate him about Iran Contra and
Mm.
smuggling guns with Jeffrey Epstein. And I managed to ask him about that. And his reaction was very, oh well, no, I don't remember that at all. Just
Mm. Well,
but these people aren't used to being put in situations where people have the confidence to question them.
mm.
Because, like I say, the majority of people there are really, and even myself, are really super respectful to the big platforms and how they built their platforms. It would take me maybe a few days to get through to having a conversation with Alex Jones to be able to come to the same point where I'd be like, he's exactly as I expect him to be,
Yeah,
mostly bombast, mostly arseholery. Sorry to say
I
that.
think there's a double challenge, and not I've really spoken to any major bigwigs, but one is what you're saying. They're very high status, and that is intimidating, no matter who you are, pretty much. But the other is I would feel I didn't know how much I could trust them, to be honest. And it's
Yeah, yeah,
very difficult if you think somebody who's a politician or a high-level entertainer. Jordan Peterson would also be similar. Just somebody who's been that raised up. You know they must have been co-opted, whether they know it or
yeah, yeah,
not.
yeah,
So
yeah.
then you don't know, do they know it or do they
Yeah,
not?
yeah, yeah. They
And if
know.
they
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
know it, they don't want to hear it. And if they do know it, they'll just lie. So you kind of, well,
yeah,
what's the point? You just can't approach
yeah.
it at all. Right?
That's what I do in my journalism. I try and subvert that. I'm actually doing something about Jordan Peterson at the moment, which is very, very because he's a good example of what we're talking about here. The ability to give yourself a sort of presentation that's acceptable to the majority of people you want to communicate with, um, and to be then become such a big influencer. And I looked back into his family history, and I wanted to know, this sort of he gives himself offers. Oh, we were Norwegian immigrants who came over. Our family was Norwegian immigrants who came over to find a new life in the Americas and then Canada, and I'm just a normal guy from Alberta and all of this. But I never believed that story. If you're up there on the high levels, then you've got to have 18 pages of nights in your family history at least, because
Uh-huh.
that's where I've got to so far, 18 pages. But people will be able to find out that research on
Yeah.
when it comes out.
Yeah.
These people are always related to the upper echelons of power, and it's the information that they guard to keep themselves up there. And
Wow.
we're entering into a world where artificial intelligence is creating the information for them. And I think that we're on the point where they're about to lose the ability to keep hiding all of that information as well. Um, do you think
Mm.
that if we lose this battle and artificial intelligence starts running the show, we start relying it for everything, which is exactly what we could probably expect to happen? Um, do you think that that will be good for the elites?
No, I don't. Well,
Are they creating their
obviously,
own death?
yeah, because obviously, maybe want to be careful about using a term to describe a bunch of people we don't really know
No, yeah, 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 yeah.
who they
I mean
are
the
and so on.
downfall of the
But
establishment, of the current establishment, the death of the current establishment, rather than the death of people individually.
yeah, but what I was going to qualify is that I mean, we don't really know what's driving the agendas that are apparently being driven by the elite, or we could say we don't know what's driving the elite who are seemingly driving the agendas. So, uh, to my mind, what's driving the elite is also what's empowering the elite, which is Satan slash trauma, just to keep it simple so I can get to my next point. It's not something good. So therefore, if they were to the extent that they could succeed, and I think it's absolutely limited, but they're not really going to get to enjoy the benefits of it. I mean, you're talking about your discomfort. I have a feeling, because I could say I'm quite uncomfortable in many ways too. Like I'm always questioning and doubting, and I'm definitely not complacent. I'm comfortable in ways I think are natural and healthy, like in my body and my diet, and just walking in nature. And my marriage is reasonably stress-free, and so on. But
Be
I've got
careful, yeah. Don't make it more stress. Go on
yeah.
then.
So yeah, I got enough comfort, I'd say, and I watch ordinary TV shows in the evening and so on. Um, but I do have a certain element of dissatisfaction that keeps me banging away, work going into things, and it motivates me. So I think it's probably, a tolerable or a reasonable amount of dissatisfaction. But I think when we're talking about the quote elite unquote, I think they're driven by such deep chronic dissatisfaction that essentially they want to kill their souls. And and think that somehow they get relief if they can completely destroy their souls or cut off all connection to their souls, they'll get relief. Well, of course, nothing could be further from the truth. So, and this does extend to all of humanity, that we've all been infected with this virus that somehow, because there's discomfort in the body and in the deep unconscious and in the emotions and just being present and interacting with nature and other human beings, because it's uncomfortable, we look for more and more distractions and escape mechanisms and dissociative strategies. And so we sign up for disembodiment. And it doesn't lead to a good place for anyone. So no, is the short answer. I mean, I don't see there's any real victory possible here when you're pitted against life. I mean, or God even, how can you win that battle? You can't. You can just prolong the agony of trying to resist nature, life, the divine. It's a bad situation for everybody, but it's much worse for the people who are really driving this, who've become the main instruments of this organized malevolence. Obviously, we could, if we really wanted to extend our imagination and our compassion, we could see that those are the ones most in need of compassion. I don't necessarily go there because I have a hard time having compassion for my wife, never mind for the elite, right? I know my
You're getting
limitations.
yourself in all sorts of trouble if you're not careful.
Nah, she's heard it all. She's heard it all. And I've learned
I
just
bet.
not to pretend. It's just the main thing is not to pretend that we're more virtuous than we are.
No.
Uh, just let ourselves be as fucked up as we are and just work with that. Not even work on it, just work with it. And not be as good as we can be, but just be as honest as we can be about that, about our limitations. And again, that's about engaging with other people and with physical reality.
Mm.
You're constantly coming up against your limits, but it's good. It may not be fun. This is why I picked the Book of Job as my sort of reference point or launching point for the Substack, because that Book of Job contains a parable, really, if I'd say, for the human situation, which is we are estranged from God. We don't know what God's doing. God up there on high is making bets with the devil and doing all kinds of weird things. And in fact, the bad things that happen have got nothing to do with our own sinfulness. They're just kind of the way that existence is unfolding. There's a big thing is being worked out here on these
Mhm.
levels that we can't possibly understand. But the main thing is to be willing to stand up and be counted, and to refer primarily to our own sense of what is true. This is the thing in the Book of Job, is he's saying, why is all these bad things happening? He doesn't know that God made a bet with Satan, because Satan said, if that's your best man, I bet I can turn him against you, right? And all his friends are telling him the bad things are happening because you're bad. And Job is saying, no, I know that's not true. I'm not perfect, but I know I didn't do anything to deserve this. So I want to talk to God. I want to hear what God has to say. Right? That's his position. And that seems like a
Mm.
good position. Whether or not God will ever come and tell us, as he does with Job, it's all a metaphor. But
Mhm.
there is an inner compass that tells us the difference between right and wrong. That's the audience with God, I'd say, the soul. If we can find the way to refer to that, consult with that, we don't have to worry about anything else. Because if your soul says you're all right, that's God saying you're all right. So, okay, I'm all right. You have to, it's every second, of
Mhm.
course, you have to check in. Um, anyway, I mean, that was a big ambling around the brambles, really, wasn't it? Your question was about the elite. Uh, about
Well, my thought on the original what I was trying to make is really they're creating an infrastructure where intelligence will no longer be in their hand and information will no longer be in their hands. They won't be able to control it
Oh
anymore.
yeah, you're making that point. You see, because I think the practical point is that the internet was always controlled from the beginning. It was a weapon that's been
Hmm.
used um, or it's been employed
I
with the
chuckle
awareness.
because Usenet existed before the internet, so to
Well,
use
DARPA.
it is yeah exactly.
I mean, the DARPA, of course, was the military intelligence thing, but with the awareness that it could be used against, the controllers would know that they were providing this tool, just like the printing press before, that could definitely undermine the structures of power that were installed in society. So they would have known, let's say, to say they, it's a bit tricky, but it would have been known that it would have to be a real changing of the landscape. The methods of control would have to become very, very different. And one of the obvious examples is they can't control information anymore, so they flood us with information. So then that creates a different kind of fog, if you will. You got the fog of lies that we talked about, where you can't even find the truth. Then you got the fog of too much uh, information,
Flooding the zone.
right? Alternate things. You don't know what to believe. This is what happened with COVID. You could provide all the data you could find for somebody, and they'd say, "Well, look, I've got my source," and their source says the opposite, and they're just saying, "Well, that all sources are created equal," which obviously isn't true. Uh, But most people are now too lazy, and understandably, because as you've just testified, you can spend your whole life just checking sources, never mind compiling them. You've got to check them as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most people are far too lazy slash busy for that. So basically, if somebody can create a convincing enough piece, and or if it's what they want to hear, that's it. They'll just say, well, I got my source, you've got yours. Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
not an argument. That's just saying, basically, it's postmodernism, right? I've got my truth, you've got your truth, right?
Yeah.
So,
Relativism as well,
so it's sort of
probably.
the battle's won then at a certain point cognitively. Um, but I don't see that as a bad thing. So, in terms of the internet, the question then is, how well can we use it while we've got it? How's it going to be taken away? But what sort of incremental stages? What's it going to look like? And how far are we willing to compromise? Uh, to not have it taken away individually, and then what are we going to do without it? Those are the three questions that I'm going to pose. And of course, the fourth point then is, or where point three, question three leads to is, are we ready to live without the internet? Because we're a
Mm.
generation that was became addicted, whatever. Humanity got addicted to something within one generation, really. Like it seems indispensable to us
Yeah,
now.
that's a man. Well, that's a good way to start to good place to start to roll it down. I remember a couple of weeks ago I was watching it was some clip on Twitter or whatnot, some quick short, but it was a video of people in the 90s at an event where they're all just standing around. None of them have got mobile phones, none of them got that sort of stuff, and they're all just standing around, and they're mostly not talking to each other. They're just existing, you know. They're just chilling. They're just being. And that's what's being taken away from us, the being, the being out of human being is
Mm.
being taken away. We're being converted to humans and then to, of course, robots eventually. That's what they want to incorporate that
Yeah,
into
well, I
our
think
world.
I think somehow the human doing got lost in there as well, because human beings were once also human doings, as in I say about farming, you think about barn building, you get your village together to build a barn. That's such a community soul building experience. There are all kinds of doings that we had over
Mm,
the centuries that were just absolutely healthy ways of being, but we've actually been given all these doings, which they're not really doings because they don't facilitate being. They're more like buyings or
mm.
believings or receivings or ingestings or consumings, right? Where we've been doing,
Bindings,
yeah, they
but
bind us,
literally bindings.
binding habits, addictions, whatever. They turn us into receptacles, essentially. Like, you talk about consumers, that's part of it, but it's deeper than that. It's like the human being has been turned into a sort of expressive function of the soul, like bees making honey, into this demonic receptacle that's just supposed
Mm,
to receive, the goods, whatever it is, the media. and then eventually the technological jab that goes into your bloodstream and turns you into a human rubber factory or whatever the hell.
Doesn't even need to be a jab. I mean, the technology then increasing. We talk about terms like chemtrails and stuff. Well, we know that they were spraying zinc cadmium sulfide all over Britain, all over Britain. They were spraying us with E. coli all over Britain for years and years and years. They've recorded it in their own. It's all come out in hearings, etc.
Yeah,
As in inquests. So we know it all happened, and we were being
yeah,
told we were crazy at the time. Well, that'll be the same once we've got some sort of nanotechnology that people don't realize. They won't even see it get into your body. They won't even see, and that is truly the end of humanity. I think the end of humanity is humanity always ends with hubris. That's it. It always ends with this idea that we're above, we know best, and the thing that I think, but me and you, we'd share probably from our research, is the acceptance of being wrong quite a lot. Because I mean, when you research stuff, there's a lot of times where you come across stuff and go, "Oh my God, my whole vision of what I saw the world like has changed with just a couple of fundamental pieces of information." And again,
yeah,
we're in flux.
yeah.
Uh, Jason, can you tell people where they can buy your books and where they can get your stuff and where they can read your work?
Well, they can buy my books at landmademan.com. If they go to there, they'll find a section with all the books listed with no links to Amazon. Obviously, they can do what they want, but I've provided alternate links. They can buy audiobooks from me directly for Big Mother, Kubrickon, Vice of Kings, Prisoner of Infinity, and 16 Maps of Hell. 16 Maps of Hell, I've only got 3 hardback copies left because it was a limited run. And they're like €360 each, so I might have them and be on my desk. I did sell one for €700 recently, so you never know. And beyond that, then I have a weekly podcast called the Job Cast, The Children of Job, which, by the way, on Hubris, the tagline there is the place where faith and hubris meet. And this is back to Job. My sense is, he gets accused of hubris by his friends, but when God comes down, he says, "No, Job, he spoke rightly about me. Job was saying, I'm an asshole and you can't trust me." Well, Job was right. You guys, you're a bunch of losers, and you're going to have to ask Job to pray for your forgiveness. So there's something about, too much faith is not good. We do need this element of just standing up for our own sense of who we are, even in the face of being condemned by everyone around us, like trusting that God can express through us without having to defer or refer to some external authority. Anyway, that's why I say it's the place where faith and hubris meet. And that's where all my activity is at the Substack. So I've been actually finally, for the first time, earning a living writing, because you can't earn a living writing.
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
If you write the kind of books I write anyway. So it's paid, but I do a lot of free material there. I do an essay every Wednesday and a podcast every Saturday. And I'm currently doing a series about this subject that I didn't want to name today because I don't want to get you banned from YouTube. But yeah, what's going on around there, around these stories that we've been told, and how much have we been defined by them, and how much do we need to take apart the stories to get a little bit closer to what's true. It's one thing to acknowledge that we keep getting it wrong, but it's another, which is healthy and good. But we also have to recognize that we can get closer to being right. You just have to keep banging away. And part of it is knowing, well, we'll probably never get to be completely objectively right, but at least compared to how I was yesterday, right? I'm getting wiser. If wisdom doesn't come with age, then what's the point in getting old?
Beautiful, beautiful way to end it there. Thank you very much, Jason, for coming on the NEWSPASTE Podcast.
Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, I enjoyed it very much.
Young generation like Prime Minister Trudeau, president of Argentina and so on, so that we penetrate the cabinets.